This is Roy's 139th resurrection. Every time he dies, he wakes up again on the same morning, and then he re-experiences everything that day, and he can remember what happened each day. Each time the killer arrives on time, first, he lies down to hide from the knife. Then lean over to put on your shoes and dodge the knife on your side as you lift your trousers. He faces a sneak attack from behind and then easily disarms his opponent with his clothes. He knows every attack by heart, because he has been through this countless times. Seeing his enemy fall to the ground, he knows he now has 6 seconds to spare, and that's when he pours himself a hot cup of coffee. That's how the day goes. He knows that his enemy's attack has yet to stop. First, he knocks out his opponent with a single blow. Next, he puts on his watch and starts to count. As expected, a second wave of killers is just outside the window. This time the enemy had sent in a helicopter gunship. He was already used to the frenzy of Gatling fire. When the enemy ran out of bullets, he threw a flying knife and instantly killed the enemy. At this point, the uncontrolled Gatling will start to misfire. He walks leisurely through the rain of bullets. Roy knows by heart where each bullet will hit in the next few seconds. But until now, Roy had no idea why he was being hunted. He didn't know how to break the bloody time loop. He sits on the sofa in despair, looking at pictures of himself and his ex-wife. Roy used to have a happy life too. After expertly dodging the propeller, he knew that in 9 seconds, the helicopter would explode. Roy jumped out of the window and landed in a rubbish truck. This is a lesson he has learned through life and death. He had previously lost his life at the wheel 22 times. Roy then walked freely through the streets. He could come back to life infinitely anyway. He could now do whatever he wanted. This sports car is one of Roy's regulars. After grabbing the driver out of the car, he removes the driver's sunglasses, and that's when the third wave of killers arrives. They are a pair of sharpshooters. If Roy wasn't fast enough, he'll be shot in the head mercilessly. Roy starts racing with them in a frenzy. On the run, he expertly dodges every shot. At this point, he had to watch out for the bus that might appear. A couple of times, he was knocked right off the road, but no matter what he tries, there's only one outcome: he gets killed every day. Because Roy would meet more killers next, he was blown up 7 times by this little dwarf. Even if Roy gets away with it, next, he would meet this man who looked so much like him. Roy was also killed by him 3 times. The best was this woman with a samurai sword, Guanyin. Roy also has successfully killed other killers. Only Guanyin. He could not find her whereabouts. She cut Roy's head off at every crucial moment. Roy sometimes escaped the killer's pursuit, but he didn't even investigate why he was caught in a time loop. Nor does he investigate why these killers are trying to kill him. Instead, he goes to his friend's bar and asks the owner for a bottle of the strongest Chinese liquor. He wants to use alcohol to numb himself. Roy tried to fight back, but the killers were too many and too strong. He never lived to see the next day, so he just gave up the fight. Roy could guess who was keeping him in an infinite loop. It would be his ex-wife. His ex-wife, Gemma, was a top physicist. The day before, he fell into the loop. He happened to be in the lab looking for her. Gemma looks panicked. She asks Roy for help, but doesn't tell him how to help. She sees that Roy has agreed and immediately cuts off a section of his hair. She then tells Roy that she wants him to stop being down in the dumps and return to his old self. Roy was a captain in the Special Forces, but after he left the army, he had nothing else to do, and his relationship with his family was getting worse and worse, and so he became more and more decrepit. Even Gemma chose to divorce him. And the next day, he was in an endless cycle. Gemma was giving him a chance to start over, and that chance is countless. Roy tried to call Gemma too, but it was her boss who answered the phone. He told Roy that Gemma had died last night, and that he would be next. It looked like Clive had sent the killer, but Roy doesn't even want to look for the man behind it, because every day is hell for him. No matter where he was hiding, he never survived past 1247. Roy didn't want to give up the struggle. He guessed that his abnormality must have something to do with Gemma. He remembered the last time they had seen each other. She had given him this book for his birthday. The key to breaking the time loop was hidden inside. This time, Roy had gone into hiding in an underground space. He wanted to find the clues Gemma had left in the book. It was then that Roy saw his and Gemma's child. Since their divorce, he hadn't spent much time with them, so now that he had unlimited time to replay, Roy decided to play the game with the child. When Roy walked out of the game room, he looked up at the clock as a habit. It was now 12:50. That was 3 minutes longer than the longest he had ever lived. Why hasn't the killer shown up all this time? Roy quickly thought back to what was different about this resurrection. It turns out he had been in the underground space. There was no signal there. which meant he must have had a tracker on him. Roy had just thought of this when the killers appeared one by one. Roy's first instinct was not to run but to turn and protect the child. But he was too late. The killers shot him at the same time. This time he died in front of the child. But this time, Roy's death did not end in pain, for he saw in his son's eyes the shock, the grief, and the hidden love he had for him. Roy suddenly felt happy. Waiting for Roy to come back to life again, he grabbed the killer hard and asked how he tracked him down, but the killer didn't give him any answers until he died. So Roy had to find a friend in the security company. He asked where the tracker would be least likely to be found if implanted in a person's body. His friend told him it would be the teeth. Roy then remembered that just last night, he had met a hot girl in a bar. She was a dentist. After their date, the woman took him to the clinic to check all his teeth. Roy immediately rushed into the toilet. One by one, he started pulling teeth. Faced with the pain, he used white wine to numb himself. Eventually, he managed to find the tracer. It turns out the woman who wakes up next to him every morning is not good either. When Roy pressed her, he got his answer. The head of security at Gemma's experimental base was the mastermind behind all the killings. Roy used the tracker as bait, setting up traps to lure the killers. Then he killed them one by one. All the killers have now been eliminated. The next one is Clive, the man behind the scenes. Roy drove up to the lab and headed straight for the wall. After resurrecting again, it's time for the second break-in. Roy chose to drive a flying leap in by car this time, but he didn't expect the dozens of security guards inside, and the car was instantly beaten into a hornet's nest. However, Roy was expecting this and wasn't even in the car, and the car is filled with Roy's homemade bombs. As he pressed the switch, all the guards were blown up, but just as Roy turned around, he found the head of security right behind him. Roy had to come back to life and start all over again. The three break-in. Roy killed the guy who looked like him first. Then he changed his clothes and used his ID card to infiltrate the base. By the time Roy reached the lift, just as he swiped his card, he was told he had no access, so he was killed by the soldier. The fourth break-in. This time Roy chose to strike first and killed the soldier. He cautiously walked out of the lift, but dozens of guns were already pointed at him. Roy gives himself a good thrashing, much to the surprise of the security chief. The fifth break-in. After taking out the soldier, Roy realized there was surveillance inside the lift. No wonder there were so many people waiting for him every time. Then came the sixth break-in. This time, Roy disguised himself as a soldier and finally managed to enter the lab. But Guanyin was already here waiting for him. Now Roy had a weapon in his hand. However, the next moment, he realized the pistol was empty of bullets. So Roy was killed by Guanyin again, but he wasn't afraid because Roy could come back to life again. This was Roy's 151st resurrection, but his opponent, Guanyin, is not only agile, but his blade can even cut through a pistol. Roy was then cut in two as well. After being killed by Guanyin more than 20 times, Roy finally learned that he could not beat Guanyin with a gun. So after Roy's resurrection, he found Daifeng, the world's top swordswoman. He learned the art of swordsmanship from Daifeng. At first, they used their hands as swords. Roy was beaten and bruised by Daifeng. When the day was done, Roy committed suicide and started all over again. The next step was to start teaching with a wooden sword. Even though Roy could only take a beating at first, but as time went on and on and on, Roy's swordplay became more and more proficient. He gradually came to understand the essence of swordplay, from the point where he could last a few moves under Daifeng to the end, where he was on par with him. In the end, he even defeated Daifeng in just 7 moves. Then came Roy's 200th resurrection. He continued to the final level to challenge Guanyin. This time, he put down his weapon. Instead, he took his longsword and fought his opponent head-on. Guanyin was the first to dive in. Roy sees this and uses his blade to block quickly. In a matter of moments, he had cut off a strand of his opponent's hair. The two fight again. At this point, Roy has one hand behind his back. Even if he fights with only one hand, he can handle any attack from his opponent with ease. Roy has reached the highest level of unity with his sword. No matter what counterattack Guanyin makes, his blade can pierce his opponent's vitals with precision, even if she takes the opportunity to knock Roy's weapon away. Guanyin is no longer a match for Roy. And then the security chief appeared out of nowhere. He opened fire on Roy. Roy had to hide behind a pillar. The captain, armed with the weapon, went after him. He didn't expect him to be a rookie. The next second, Roy managed to kill him. Now only the last man behind the curtain remains, but Clive's combat value is almost zero. He tried to pick up his pistol to attack, but Roy stabbed him through the palm with his sword. It was then that Clive finally understood. Roy's ex-wife must be the reason why Roy is so powerful. She used Roy's DNA to activate the company's most powerful technology before he died. This infinite reboot technology was meant to be used by Clive for world domination. Gemma discovers his plot, and she wants Roy to stop it. That's when Clive told Roy he would still send someone to kill his son every time. Roy was so angry that he killed Clive with a single blow of his sword and went to save his son, but it was too late. When he arrived at the game room, he saw only his son's cold body. It turned out that his son had died with him more than 200 times. Roy was immediately devastated. He was not a good husband, let alone a good father. Just then, a massive explosion hit him. It turns out that the reboot machine is overloaded with energy and explodes. The whole city would be destroyed. Next, Roy comes back to life, but this time, he doesn't want to fight back. Knowing the truth, he was left with nothing but despair. He let the first killer kill him, and so he died many times. No matter how much his opponents cut him, he wanted to sleep now. Roy died and rose again infinitely. This was perhaps the punishment for his previous life. Until this time, Roy was back on his feet. Now that Gemma has given him this chance, he must make up for his past, to get back on his feet like Gemma wanted him to. After taking care of all the killers, Roy returned to his son. He talked with the boy and played games with him, and then bought him food when it was over. He would do what a father should do. Finally, when the city exploded, Roy started all over again. Slowly, he began to understand his child and how much of an asshole he had been. Until this day, the boy suddenly told Roy that his mother had called him this morning. It was then that Roy realized. He woke up every morning when Gemma was still alive. Roy still had a chance to save her. He immediately went to the lab. After taking out Clive and the security guards, he saw on the CCTV that Gemma had been killed at 7:14 a.m., and he wakes up at 7 a.m. every morning. That means he had 14 minutes to save her. Roy then immediately shot himself. When Roy came back to life again, this time, he scrambles for time and jumps straight into the helicopter outside the window. He threatened the pilot and flew quickly to the experimental base. It only took him 10 minutes to reach his destination. That's when he saw the killers making their way to the lobby. Roy took out all the killers in 10 seconds. Immediately afterwards, he rushed to the laboratory. He was on a rampage, and no one could stop him on his way. Finally, at the last minute, he found Gemma. Roy immediately killed the captain and Clive. This time he finally succeeded. The two embraced each other in a tight embrace. Gemma knew Roy could do it, but the crisis wasn't over now. Soon the machine will explode just as it did before, because Gemma had used Roy's genes to activate the machine. So now only Roy can shut it down, but she doesn't know if Roy will wake up again. But Roy wasn't going to run away this time. He was going to take on the responsibility of a man. Finally, Roy stepped into the machine with determination. This time he wouldn't back down, even if he never wakes up.